Hello, welcome to the preview and prediction video for UFC Fight Night 110. This is Derek Lewis versus Mark Hunt on the 10th of June in Auckland, New Zealand. I think this is the first time actually New Zealand have been down to Australia a few times, but you know, this should be an exciting fight and there's a lot of local fighters on the card. The first fight of the night is a women's division fight, and this is debutant Nadia Kassem, who's 4-0, taking on JJ Aldrich, who's 4-2. Now, as well, it's all good and well having local fighters debut on the card, but this is very questionable as to if it is really UFC level. When I made my prediction video at the beginning of the year, I did say that I thought 187 Nadia Kassem would get to the UFC, and she's won 4 fights in less than 2.5 minutes, all via TKO. So she really does have power. Now, the quality of the opponents, it's very, very questionable. And I think actually even going up against Aldrich, she's faced better opponents, but they're not that accomplished either. So I think the only thing that I can really say about this is that, that this is going to be interesting. This is two people at the beginning of their career. They've both got something to prove here, but I think that the local lady makes this 5-0 Kassem via TKO victory. Next up, we have Thibault Goutou versus Dong Hyun Kim. Now, if Dong Hyun Kim sounds familiar, that's because he's the second, or there are 2 fighters in the division with that same name. This is Maestro, the other one is Stungun. So yeah, try not to get them confused. Goutou is 11-3, Kim is 14-8 with 3 draws. Again, not the greatest exhibition of high-level martial arts in the UFC from these guys. Kim has been KO'd twice in his last 3 fights, and GT has lost all 3 in the UFC. I mean, what can we really say about these guys? I think Kim has fought better guys. I think he's actually a little bit more accomplished at this level. Both guys really need to prove something. They need to step up and show that they deserve to be here. I'm going to go with Dong Hyun Kim by decision because I think he's just got the edge in terms of experience. But, if I was looking at this as a New Zealand fan, the quality of card that the UFC is putting on for us, it's very disappointing. Next up, we have another debutant, Luke Jedi Jumeau versus Dominique Steele. Now, Jumeau is 11-3, Steele is 14-8. However, inside the UFC, he's 1-3. What can we say about this? Again, another fight where 2 guys really need to prove themselves. Steele is fighting for his UFC career, in my opinion, and Jumeau needs to prove that he deserves to be here. He has a good record, but again, against poor opponents. Now, you can only beat the guy that's in front of you, but if I'm honest, Jedi probably wouldn't be fighting in the UFC if they weren't fighting in Auckland. I think Steele's experience inside the octagon is going to be the deciding factor here, and he's probably going to win this via decision. But when we look at the beginning of this card, I don't think there's too much to get excited about. That said, the Kuchi Kunamoto against Wally Alves fight, I do think, is a very good fight. I'm a big fan of Wally Alves. Kunamoto is 18-6, 2 draws and 1 no contest. Alves is 11-2. Kunamoto is an ex-skateboarder He's fought most of his career in Pancras, and I think despite that, he's a good performer. He's very accomplished. I just don't think that he's really a top 10, top 15 guy. In terms of Alves, he's lost the last two, but I think he's more than capable of getting a submission victory over Kunimato. Alves does have good victories over Colby Covington, Nordine Taliev, and Alan Jouban. So he's a very, very accomplished fighter. And I think, he's just, if he can get that winning way back, I think he does have what it takes to be a top 10, top 15 guy. Again, another debut. We have Mizuto Hirota, who's 19-7 and 2 draws, against debutant Alexander Volkanovski. May not sound Australian, but he is. Sorry, not another debut, rather. Anyway, this is the second stint in the UFC for Durable Hirota. But I think Volkanovski's TKO power is what's going to be the deciding factor here. Both guys here, again, they need to show why they belong in the UFC, and if they're going to stick around, what are they going to be able to do beyond fighting low-level guys. The next fight is Damian Brown versus Vince Pichel. You need a long memory to remember Pichel. The guy is 9-1. He lost the tough 15 finale to Ali Aquinta. And then he lost to Rustem Kabalov way back in 2012. He fought twice in 2014, 2 wins to his credit, but he hasn't fought since then. Now Brown, 17-9. He's 2-1 in the UFC, winning his last 2. He's fought 8 times since Pichel fought last, winning 7 of those 8. Also the hometown guy in a certain way. So I think for all those reasons, we have to give Brown the decision victory. But I think that this is a good fight. I think this will be the most competitive fight on the card so far. And, that's one that I'm more looking forward to. Now, the light heavyweight battle between Luis Enrique de Silva and Ion Cutelaba. I think this is we can call this the battle of the bangers. De Silva is 12-2, Cutelaba is 12-3. This could go all 3 rounds, but I find it highly unlikely. Cutelaba is 1-2 in the UFC, but he's never been KO'd. There's no shame in losing to Misha Serkinov or Jared Cannonier. I think those are 2 guys that are going to be around in the top of the division for a long time. So I think Cutelaba has everything it takes to be a top 10 guy, but can he make the improvements to move into the top 5 and maybe beat the guys that beat him, or beat some of the old guard of the top 5, De Silva hasn't been KO'd either. I think on the ground the Brazilian has the advantage, and maybe, as so often happens when you get 2 guys who are skillful on the ground, they fight it out, or it's decided on the feet. Maybe the battle of the bangers is decided on the ground and De Silva wins via submission. However, I do think this is a great fight, and we're starting to get into the good fights on the card now. Next up, we have Dan Hooker, 14-7, against UFC veteran Ross Pearson, 19-13. Unfortunately, the British veteran Pearson has lost his last 3, and his last 7 have gone to decisions. So he's had a really hard time of it as of late in the octagon. Hooker is 3-3 inside the UFC. What can you say? These are 2 very skillful, accomplished fighters. And sometimes, when you get a guy like this, or You know, if you think about a Joe Lozon, technically they've got everything. And if you ask them to show you some techniques, if you ask them to show you on the ground, on the feet, they're pretty good all around. But sometimes, you know, being technically proficient and just having some edge or some momentum, it's quite different. I think this one's going to go to decision. This will certainly be a contender for fight of the night, in my opinion. I think Hooker will be the hometown hero and get the decision. And sadly for Ross Pearson, this could be the last time we see him in the octagon. You know, I certainly think he's got enough where he could go away and regroup and do something on the regional scene, especially in the UK with Bama. Maybe go over to Poland at KSW, something like that. He could go over to Ryzen. This is a very well-known fighter, but it depends what he would like to do. Okay, the next fight on the card is Ashkan Mokhtarian, who's 13-1, welcoming back John Moraga, 16-6. Now, Moraga has a much better resume and has the octagon experience over debutant Mokhtarian. And Mokhtarian certainly has not fought the level of guys Moraga has, but Ashkan has handled every person put in front of him, you know, in a very competent manner. Moraga rather is on a 3-fight losing skid, but I feel that he's going to get back in the win column with a submission. Yeah. Now, the one thing I would say is Mokhtarian's only loss is via submission, via choke. You know, and it's difficult to say, has he, you know, filled that hole in his game? We'll see against Moraga. Moraga's been there against, you know, the top competitors in the division in the past. Can he get back there? You know, it's an interesting question. Next up, we have Ben Nguyen against Tim Elliott. Now, this was supposed to be Joseph Benavidez, and if I'm honest, I would rather have seen the Benavidez versus Elliott rematch than the Ben 10 versus Tim Elliott. I think Tim Elliott is very close to the top of the division, and I don't feel the same about Ben 10. Now, the common opponent recently is Smolka, and Elliott won, and Nguyen lost via TKO. I think the most likely scenario for this fight is that Elliott puts the pressure on him, smothers Nguyen on the floor. Yeah, he's gonna win this one by decision, I think. You know, hopefully he gets that Joe B rematch, and the winner of that will go on to fight for the title again, maybe, or go on to a #1 contenders fight. You know, I think Tim Elliott has proven that outside the UFC, he's a top dog. Inside the UFC, you know, he beats people outside the top 10, maybe even top 5. So, all respect to him. He's a guy that, you know, previously reached the peak, got dropped out of the UFC, and then came back, you know. Next up, we have, you know, Derek Brunson against the Olympic hero Dan Kelly. Brunson is 16-5. Kelly is 13-1. Kelly got a good win last time out against Rashad Evans, against the legend, let's say, where Brunson got a questionable loss against Anderson the Spider Silva. So, what do we know about this? We know that Brunson is incredibly talented in all aspects of the game, and Kelly is very good. You know, impressive hands. You know, most people expect him to just focus on the judo, the wrestling, takedowns, but very good hands. But Kelly is not long for this game, you know. If you look at him, he's got one run in him. His knee looks terrible. It looked like wrapped up like a mummy. But I do think he's got one run in him, you know. And I think for Brunson, I don't know whether the motivation's lacking or something, because, you know, he needs to up his work rate. He needs to become a pressure fighter, throw more volume. You know, I'm not saying that Kelly doesn't have a gas tank on him, but as a younger fighter, Brunson really needs to put it on Kelly. He needs to make this a high-paced, high-volume fight. I don't want to say that he gets lazy, but I think he's maybe in that Jorge Masvidal mold where he's got the skills and he relies on these skills to do it for him, where he needs to put it on people. He needs to show that he's the winner of the fight. For that reason, I'm going to go with Dan Kelly via decision, and his ascent up and up the ranks. It's amazing. You know, I could even see him versus Robert Whittaker. I wouldn't say that would become a #1 contender fight, but I think that could become the fight that creates the, you know, if we had like a bracket, you could say that that would be one side of the bracket, semifinals. You know, I don't know who else will be on the other side. Maybe Luke Rockhold, if he comes back and gets a win. Gastelum is fighting Weidman, maybe. Yeah, so maybe I think Gastelum wins, then Gastelum maybe gets in that position for the other side of the bracket. But I'm very excited about that. It's a very high level fight. It's a good fight. And then we go into the main event, you know, and what can you say about Mark Hunt? Mark Hunt versus Derek Lewis. Mark Hunt, 12-11. That really belies the legend that is Mark Hunt, you know. And at this point, I think the name, the brand of Mark Hunt is greater than what the fighter is inside the octagon. He's still probably one of the hardest hitters and toughest chins in the history of the sport, but I do feel that nut has been cracked, and while dangerous with his TKO power, I think he remains hittable, and the chin is somewhat questionable. I think the distractions outside of the cage, the legal issues with the UFC, do not help him. You know, I hope he's getting paid a lot of money for this fight. I hope the fans come out and cheer him. And I would love to see him, you know, get a victory here and retire. I think that would be great for him, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a 6-fight win streak train behind a black beast of a man called Derek Lewis. You know, at the moment, there's no clear-cut #1 contender in the division. And with a TKO over Mark Hunt, I think Derek Lewis could be the next man to face Stipe Miocic. It could be Francis Ngannou, but I think you're going to see a guy in Hunt who's kind of fighting out his contract at this point. He's fighting for the money, you know, we know that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he's fighting a kind of irresistible force at the moment, you know, and don't get me wrong, I don't think Derek Lewis has come across a guy like Mark Hunt on his run, but if he knocks out Mark Hunt, you know, and does it in impressive fashion in Mark Hunt's backyard, which I think he will do, how can you deny this man a title shot? Who's above him? Cain Velasquez, who's been on the shelf forever? I don't think so. So I really hope that if he wins this, Derek Lewis gets the victory, gets the title shot that he deserves. I think, you know, the beginning of this card, let's be honest, it sucks. They're very questionable fights with a lot of people either proving that they deserve to be in the UFC or fighting for their UFC careers. You know, some people getting the debut because they're only in their home country. You know, a lot of people can tell you, oh, you know, when the UFC goes outside the United States, they don't respect the local fans, they give them nothing. And there's a very good argument for that, you know, especially looking at this card. But if I'm honest, I think the end of the card is very respectable. Even, you know, I think the final 2 or 3 are definitely pay-per-view fights. Tim Elliott, and Ben Nguyen, not so much, but Brunson, Kelly, and the main event are for sure main pay-per-view card level fights. It's the first of 3 fight nights in a row where they're traveling around a little bit, so it looks like it's going to be a good start to some interesting fights for the UFC and a nice busy period. So let me know what you think. Hit me up, subscribe, like, you know, hope you enjoyed the video.